to start the recording. Sorry about that. So again, welcome to everybody to our April session of Power Hug, the Power Platform Healthcare User Group. We wanted to start today just by encouraging and reminding you to join the community, participate, ask questions, and also make an ask that we really need presenters for this community to make it great. We've had the folks from Boston Scientific a handful of times, and they've delivered some wonderful content. And we wanted to kind of put this slide up just to help you kind of spur some ideas for what topics might be welcome, and encourage you to not think you need the perfect story, the perfect use case, the end-to-end business case. I think everybody's experience is valid. And when we started this idea at the Power Platform Conference last year, one of the things that we noticed and we learned is it was all too common for folks sitting around those tables to be at similar stages of the journey. And sometimes, sharing in that unknown, sharing in that getting started, it helps everybody to just identify these challenges and create a little bit more value. So if you have stories of your user adoption journey, your journey setting up governance or the COE, we welcome those. If you've got a specific use case that you delivered, that returned some ROI or was particularly valuable, we'd love to hear that. If you've got a use case that just turned out to be super easy or a perfect fit for Power Platform, we'd love to hear that. Same, promoting or managing your citizen developer community, using low code as a strategy or as a platform for development, any sort of organizational changes, transformation, or alignment that you did on Power Platform, would love to hear it, as well as any lessons learned. Maybe you've learned some stuff the hard way. Maybe you've gone through some challenges, and I think everybody would love to hear that stuff. We're also in the process, Randall and I, of kind of trying to rethink some of the ways that we'll organize this meeting. So we're going to continue to meet the fourth Thursday of every month. And today we've got a really great presenter from Microsoft to help you with some governance and adoption strategies for scaling out the platform. But we're going to try next month an Ask Me Anything session. And we were able to solicit the help of a couple of what we call at Microsoft Global Black Belts. The coolest title at Microsoft and some of the biggest brains at Microsoft. So these folks have a ton of experience with our Power Automate tools, including RPA, as well as the broader platform. And we really want to encourage you to bring your questions. Nothing's off limits. Randall's going to drop a survey into the Q&A tab here. So if you want to submit your question in advance, or if you're going to have to come back to the recording and want us to get to your question while we're there, please feel free to do so. We would love to have those from you. And then we'll also be taking questions live on that session next week as well. So if you can help us to kind of drive some awareness, we'd love for you to invite colleagues, friends, admins, anybody else who might need some questions or some unlocks for the Power Platform. So we'll try that session next month. And if you have other ideas for sessions, content, formats, we encourage your participation. So reach out on the platform, use the forum on the platform, and just really appreciate everybody who's taken the time out of their day to be a part of the Power Hub group here. So next month, again, we've got our Power Platform Ask Me Anything. That's featuring our Microsoft technical team. And we'll be here the fourth Thursday of every month. There may or may not be times when we move that. We had to move it one time for some availability of a presenter, but we're going to try to make this a regular and consistent thing kind of over the lunch hour. So we hope you'll include us in your routine, block your calendars. And if you follow myself, Randall, and Mary on LinkedIn with those links there, we'll always be advertising and promoting these. The other nice thing about those LinkedIn events is that we have the ability to add those to your calendar. So if you ever need the calendar invite as a reminder, you can always find the details for each event and each session on my LinkedIn page there. I mentioned the rebrand, so welcome to Power Hug, healthcare user group for the uninitiated. We hope you like the kind of fun we're having with this. And if you have the appetite, or if it's a way that you like to consume content, we encourage you to come find us on YouTube on our new Power Hug YouTube channel. That's at Power Platform Hug. And just one last time, I'll say that QR code in the bottom right is just for joining the community. So the community is where I can do messaging of the entire community to remind you of events and upcoming speakers. We also have some forum capability there. So if you do ever need a question or any urgent help that you think the community could help with, we encourage you to go there and post those ideas. And you can always find the next Thursday event under the events tab via that same platform or portal. So welcome to Power Hug, and with that, I will hand it off to Randall to talk about some of our upcoming events, and we'll then hand the keys to John Landgrave for a presentation today.
Awesome. Go ahead, Scott. Thank you. All right. So a few things we wanted to just highlight in upcoming events. Obviously, the Power Hug for Thursday, May 23rd is going to be that Ask Me Anything session. Feel free to submit your questions via the link in the Q&A. You can go there and get them in advance. We'll also do them live. One other thing to note as well, in addition to that YouTube channel that we've just launched, if you have demonstrations of use cases that you'd like to share with the community and that you're authorized to share with the community, but you don't want to do it live, you're not up to presenting live in a webinar, feel free to record yourself doing the video and get that to Scott or myself, and then we can upload that into the YouTube channel, as well as useful use cases that we can share amongst the community on that YouTube channel. Microsoft Build is in just a few weeks. Some exciting announcements there coming for Power Platform and the rest of Microsoft Cloud. Feel free to tune into that. Go ahead and register for that and attend virtually when and where you can. Power Platform Conference. So kind of the start of this whole user group came from last year's Power Platform Conference and one of the sessions that they had there. So we're looking forward to doing that again in September. Registration's open. If you plan on attending, that's great. We're looking to hopefully have an in-person Power Hug session for all the Power Huggers and bring everyone together and kind of see each other face to face and share our experiences with Power Platform. And then lastly, we have Ignite in November. Again, registration I think is open, and go ahead and register for that as well and learn more about business applications, Power Platform, all the good stuff. So with that, if you want to go to the next slide, Scott. So we have John Landgrave here, our global black belt. He's going to talk about security and governance and how you scale it across your enterprise. Just looking forward to a lot of good little nuggets here that's coming out of John today, as well as I think some of his wit, I'm sure, will be shared. I'm always looking forward to that whenever he presents. So with that, John, I'll hand off to you and have you get started.
Hey, thanks so much. So again, my name is John Landgrave. I'm on our global black belt team, and so I've been working with a Power Platform since 2016, actually. So my first experience began with Power Platform when it was an alpha product called Project Sienna. And so I have seen the product go through multiple iterations. And what I can tell you is that we are just now, in the last year, getting to the vision that we first discussed when it became a product 7 or 8 years ago. And that vision was that the Power Platform would provide the ability to create the same high fidelity applications using this platform that an experienced developer could create with classic pro code tools. Moreover, the vision was that the enterprise would be able to use the same set of standards for either application, meaning that the production environment workflow, the lifecycle management workflow, the data investigation, data lineage workflows, all of those things would work irrespective of the method used to develop the application. Now, most of you who've been working with a Power Platform more than a couple of years understand that we have not been there before. And so what I want to focus on today is how are we getting there, and how is this going to enable you to go and build solutions for your organization that rival those that are being built by your pro code brethren. And in fact, we have several examples of even pro code or code first developers who've started saying, I'm going to build it in Power Apps first, and then if I need to enhance it, then I'll use code. So there is this mindset that says, if the goal is to lower my technical debt, lower time to value, solve complex problems, then maybe the way to do that is to use a tool that gets me there faster, even if it's just to work through some of the technical details before I decide that maybe it needs to be a pro code app. So, I'm going to talk very extensively today about what we call enterprise mode. And enterprise mode is our terminology for how I move from building productivity applications in the platform in the default or other non-default environments to how I build applications that are these high fidelity enterprise grade applications. I think it's important before we get too deeply into this to make sure that we're all clear about something. And I say all, meaning, frankly, Microsoft folks, because the platform has been growing at such a pace that sometimes we lose sight of how it's actually architected and how that impacts what we do both as enterprises, as consumers, and frankly, as Microsoft salespeople, as purveyors of the platform. The key message that I need you to get from this, though, is that the Power Platform is not an Azure service. So if I look on the right-hand side where I see all these different Azure services that are part of Azure, and again, this is a subset of the couple of hundred of different Azure services. Well, if it's not an Azure service, what is it? Well, it is a platform delivered as a service that consumes about 80 or so different Azure services under the covers. And so effectively what we're doing with the Power Platform is we are saying, rather than you have to be concerned with the intricacy of configuring and integrating a set of Azure components, we're going to give you a separate service with its own service layer, with its own APIs that I can call into to build my applications. And we're going to give you these different design services, whether it's Power Apps for forms or flows for workflows, that consume those services through this service layer. That's significant because we do have, as we start getting more and more enterprise engaged, there's a lot of confusion coming up because the Azure people inside of an organization may want to treat the Power Platform as if it is an Azure service. So they expect if they stand up a virtual network, they can just seamlessly connect to the Power Platform. Well, that's not necessarily the case because our service interface.
I don't know if you had a deck that you were going to share, but we do not have your deck right now. Sorry about that.
Well, yeah, I only share those with special people, but because of that, just for you guys, I'm going to do that. Man, you missed some really great decks there. So I apologize for that.
Oh, no problem. Thank you.
Just wait till you see this graphic. It's just going to knock your socks off. So keep your shoes on. Okay, I see a red line. Do you see a deck?
We've got it now. Thank you.
Sweet. Thank you for reminding me. That would have been a really long hour if they just had to listen to me and couldn't engross themselves in these incredible visuals. So so on the left is, again, I was just describing, there's Azure with all the services, but we are not an Azure service. We are a platform that exposes Azure services through an APAS or application as a service interface. The other thing to be aware of is that there are native Power Platform applications that are built directly on the platform. There are also applications that are built that use the platform, but have their own authorization and data management features. Well, Microsoft 365 and the way it exposes Teams and SharePoint through the default and Teams environments is one of those other platforms that consume the Power Platform, but have their own authorization and data management. What do I mean by that? Well, if I go into the SharePoint UI and I create a custom form, that custom form lives in SharePoint, not in the Power Platform. That custom form consumes the Power Platform Maker portal interface, but the result of building that application is that the application goes back into Office. This is why all of the SharePoint forms have to stay with SharePoint wherever it is. Now, we do have a function to move all of the forms to a different environment in the case that you want to have different rules for each, different connection rules, data policies. But generally speaking, you can't move your Teams content and your SharePoint content you can't move them out of the default environment unless you, in the case of SharePoint, you have to move all of them. In the case of Teams, you have to promote that Teams environment, which is a stripped down version of the environment with a stripped down version of Dataverse. You have to promote that into a full enterprise application and move it to a non-default, non-Teams environment in order to take advantage of Dataverse. So the important thing to recognize here is that we are not, most of the conversations we're going to have today are not going to be directed at the default environment and Teams environments, because the content that's in those environments, number one, is protected by Office assets. So things like um, data policy. I'm sorry, the Office DLP, data loss prevention, as opposed to, of course, Power Platform DLP, which is going to be renamed connector policies, just so we can get that confusion out of the way. But again, conceptually, we're not talking about extending productivity apps, because the enterprise requirements for protecting productivity data versus the enterprise requirements for protecting, corporate data residing in SAP or SQL databases or Oracle, Oracle. If I'm using Oracle or JD Edwards or some other system, ServiceNow, like there's all these other systems we connect to, where the data that's in those systems has a different level of importance and strategic value to the organization than a SharePoint list does. And that's not saying there aren't, obviously, we've all built applications that provide huge value for our organizations where the data is in SharePoint. But if we suggested to one of our data stewards for SAP that we take, the payroll out of SAP and drop it into a SharePoint list, you probably wouldn't get a positive response. So I think to think about here is that what we're really talking about is building applications that are enterprise grade, high fidelity applications that compete with those built by pro code engineers. And so I just want to be really clear about the focus. So, the next obvious question is, how is it that, and I made this statement earlier, that an enterprise low code platform actually lowers an organization's technical debt? And so I'm not going to drill deeply into this, but I do want you all to understand kind of the thinking around how we believe that Power Platform, when adopted as an enterprise low code platform, fundamentally changes the model for how you build applications and how the enterprise can benefit and reduce their overall technical debt. So at a really high level, if I'm building an enterprise application with a set of pro code tools, the way that typically happens is I build that application in an application stack. So I have some code, and I'll show you this it's easier to see this way. I build, say, a hosted web application on an application stack that uses a JavaScript UI framework and JavaScript for workflow and business rules. And then the way I manage the data is with stored procedures or logic apps. And then I use SQL Server for my data, right? So I build my application. I have specific versions of all these components, and all those components are designed to live inside of this stack. Now, I might build multiple applications that follow this pattern. They're all in the same stack. So I may be reusing this stack. However, in any organization, it's not just one red stack. Most organizations have tens or hundreds of red stacks. And if you think about the red stack in terms of the different component layers, what this means is that anytime something changes, say a new version of SQL Server comes out, well, now I've got to go do two things. I've got to look horizontally across all of those application stacks using SQL Server to say, what does this upgrade to SQL Server do to this stack? What can I do to take advantage of it? Does it change the way I code in some way, right? And I also have to look vertically within the stack. So is there some new stored procedure capability, and should that be somehow integrated differently at a higher level of business rule, right? So new releases in any layer of the stack affect both the horizontal and the vertical integration of that layer. So if you look at just the effort in maintaining these application stacks, this literally is the definition of what Forrester and Gartner call technical debt. And they both use different numbers, but the average is 70% of all IT budgets are spent on technical debt, like legacy debt, right? And so in order to begin being more innovative, we have to remove some of the cost, because there's a limit as to how much, I mean, IT doesn't have an unlimited budget. Those of you in IT can certainly attest to that, right? So what's happening now is the demand for IT services are dramatically exceeding the available 30% of the budget to supply them. So not only do we have tools that we can do more in the 30%, but we need to lower the 70% to get more money from IT dedicated to these functions. Well, how do we do that? A low-code platform does that for us in some ways. So for example, if I'm using the Power Platform, notice all of the layers are consistent across all the applications built in this stack. More importantly, IT is not responsible for any of this functionality. They don't have to size or install. Like if you build a Power App, and it's an enterprise Power App, and it begins consuming more resources than you anticipated, we have a service level agreement that says we'll maintain 3 nines. So if that were built on a red stack and it were underperforming, you would have to go back to the infrastructure team and you have to say, I'm going to need more resource, more compute resource. I need more data resource. Maybe I need to resize my SQL server, right? So I have people, even though it's hosted infrastructure, they still have to go make sure that infrastructure matches the application, right? Whereas in the Power Platform, if we see that you begin going, if you are moving up to where we would not be able to meet our service level, we will, behind the scenes, move your environment to a different area of the Power Platform, what we call an infrastructure stack, where it can meet those requirements. So we're responsible for making sure that you can patch, upgrade, scale, availability, logging, all that stuff we do. In addition, and this cannot be undersold from the standpoint of innovation, keep in mind that every red stack is charged through a consumption meter, which means every time I build a new application and I start consuming more, my cost increases, my technical debt increases. Whereas on Power Platform, it's a monthly license fee. So although the initial cost might be high for the first few applications, each application that you develop lowers the overall cost of every other application. And if it eliminates a red stack, it also lowers the technical debt. So this is why we're getting so much attention right now. You're seeing a whole lot of press releases around different customers adopting the Power Platform at an enterprise level for enterprise applications, because they recognize that they can build more functionality faster and reduce their technical debt as they move applications to the Power Platform. Also, and as I mentioned before, the lifecycle management, the security, auditing, governance, the things that happen in the enterprise stacks need to be consistent, because let's be honest, although Microsoft would love to tell you that ultimately everything would either be could be moved to the Power Platform perhaps, and you could lower your Azure spend, the reality is they're simply applications that the Power Platform was not designed to do. Extremely high volume applications, consumer facing applications. These are things that although we do have some capabilities in Power Pages to do those consumer facing applications, the fact of the matter is if you're building consumer facing applications with mobile clients that are designed to be installed directly out of app stores, that's not a target for us. We're really kind of focusing on enterprise apps that focus internal or with partners, and beyond that, we still think that Azure is the right place for those things to be, and there's a lot of functions and capabilities there. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the slide, but I do want to at least give you some sense of what is it when I go build an enterprise mode application, what in that model, what is it that I'm able to go consume? And so what you're seeing here are all the capabilities that are enabled with an enterprise license, and you're seeing a subset of all the different features that are being, or I should say, Azure services being consumed by the platform, but exposed through these other interfaces. In addition to the fact that a code-first developer can use Visual Studio or VS Code, and all the source code can be stored and managed inside of GitHub and Azure DevOps. So I literally can participate in the same ecosystem for support and deployment of applications as a pro-code developer, in addition to having pro-code and low-code components integrated into the same green stack. So the other thing that's critical, and I mentioned this before, is that the Power Platform, when you're writing apps in enterprise mode, also has advanced governance and security capabilities that come with the license required to build enterprise mode apps. So to be crystal clear, the Office 365 license allows you to consume the Power Platform in the context of the Office services and several other standard services like Facebook and Twitter, all the things that we use in our daily lives, but probably aren't really enterprise grade, right? But you are able to use all those things as part of that Office license. If you're going to be accessing corporate systems with corporate data, the level of security, control, management is miles beyond what you need to have if you're just using SharePoint lists. And because of that, then we have added these additional governance and security capabilities to the Power Platform licensing. Now, when you go to begin implementing the enterprise mode, there are certain things that will make you more effective when you implement that. And so what I go through it at a high level is the governance considerations when you start thinking about looking at the productivity stack as something managed by, say, SharePoint or collaboration team. And then an enterprise mode capability that is probably managed by IT or by some council, but is configured in such a way that you can then delegate responsibility and authority for sections. Say I give a group of environments to accounting and a group of environments to legal, where there's more of a federated model that those environment groups can be managed at some level, like user management and some permissions management by those folks, but the overall tenant responsibilities are still managed by corporate IT. So there is a layer of delegation in the platform that will increase over time, and we'll talk about what those things are. But to be effective, there's a couple things you need to make sure you understand. The first is that you should always consider implementing governance in what I call the can, may, should framework. What that means is can means that there are knobs and switches inside of the Power Platform that say you either can or can't do this. So I can set it up so you either can or cannot create an environment. There's a switch that I can set that stops someone from doing that. May is there's a policy. So for there's a policy that says you may not do a particular thing, right? So I may have the Facebook control open in the default environment because there's some people who need to use it, but the policy is you may not use it without getting approval from marketing, right? So I'm not stopping. I can't stop from doing it because I opened up the connector, but I have a policy that says you may not do it, right? And then finally is that should framework. The should framework is I'm consistently saying the best practice here is I should do things a particular way. So for example, rather than putting 100 individual controls on a Power App, I should take those controls and group them into components and put those on the form, because the performance is significantly better with 4 components with 25 controls than 1 screen with 100 controls, right? So think of should as best practices, right? The second thing it's critical to be successful in enterprise mode is that the default environment is only for productivity mode. And what that means is that the default environment in any unmanaged non-default environment, so any environment that isn't set as a managed environment, doesn't have Dataverse in it exposed, should only be used to extend to Office or Teams, okay? And should not have any enterprise connectors in it. So no premium connectors in non-default environments focused on productivity. As you begin implementing enterprise mode, it's important that you give a low-code developer access to any technology that they can learn that you intend to expose, right? And this includes, and specifically includes, allowing Dataverse app building inside of a developer environment, because all of our co-pilots that go build something. So if I say, build me an application to manage appointments at a car dealership, right? The table it generates is in Dataverse. Well, if I don't give them Dataverse capability, the co-pilot won't work, right? The important thing about the co-pilot is not just that it uses Dataverse, however. The co-pilot generates a 508 compliant responsive application shell that accesses the Dataverse table. So the way you get your developers from your makers from I build applications by randomly dropping things on the screen and hope it's responsive to I actually build a responsive accessible app that uses Dataverse is by letting them use the Copilot to generate the base app. So being able to give this capability to every developer using a developer environment is critical. Now, for those of you who don't know, a developer environment is an environment that you can give to each individual in your organization who has a maker role. And these developer environments do not count against your tenant allocation. So rather than setting up a standing environment, handing it to 1 or more individuals that takes away from your tenant allocation and making people makers in those environments, we're giving you the ability to create a specific environment designed for an individual to develop an application. We're also giving the capability to automatically place them there. And I'll talk about that more in a minute. A couple of things to be aware of. Power Platform, I say this all the time to customers because they tend to not get this, especially when you start bringing in Azure and IT folks who maybe have never dealt with a platform before. But it's critical to understand that the only connector that we authorize is Dataverse, because in Dataverse, we have an authorization system. For every other connector, the authorization is in the back-end service. And what I mean by that is, in SharePoint, if I build a Power App that accesses SharePoint, but I don't give you access to the SharePoint list, the app won't work, because the authorization for SharePoint exists in SharePoint, not in Power Apps. So Power Apps says authentication, but not authorization. That's a key tenet to understand. The other thing is, don't try to boil the ocean. Any type of governance initiative, including a move to enterprise mode, should be done in some kind of a crawl, walk, run fashion, meaning there are certain things I do in the crawl phase to prove the concept, to get buy-in from senior management, to get my pro and low-code developers working together. Later on, I'll show you a link to a YouTube channel that I put governance things on, and I will be releasing the next month, before build and then during build and after build, a set of videos that actually show you how to put together your crawl, walk, run initiatives around implementing enterprise mode. So I want to make sure you at least know where those are in case you want to use them. And the last tenet is that when you've implemented enterprise mode, the only permanent shared environments should be production environments. Every other environment should be able to be blown away and recreated. Okay. So if I'm building things in a development environment over time, that can get cluttered. So I may have a process that just as soon as someone ends a project or a set of applications they built, I blow the development environment away and give them a new one and recreate it. Right. That's difficult to do if I have a shared developer environment where multiple projects might be in different phases. In fact, I may never be able to blow that away. And all those makers are affecting each other by putting artifacts in that environment that someone else may depend on without knowing. So it's critical that the only permanent shared environment be production. And again, as I release these crawl, walk, run videos around governance initiatives, you'll be able to see kind of how that works. So I think it's important when I get questions about, well, how do I know the difference between a productivity or enterprise model environment? And the reality is that will generally fall out by itself, because productivity mode applications are generally the early popular apps that we write. They're more team-based. They are, the control is all centralized, and my only data sources tend to be Office data sources. And then as I mature and I begin moving to more mission critical cases where I need managing and monitoring, and I'm modernizing legacy apps, right? So the influence and use of the platform expands. That's where I end up having to say, well, these are now organization wide. This is where I need the additional governance and security. I need to access corporate assets. And so my approach changes in terms of how I'm going to go through and consume the platform. So the next thing I want to go through is what is it that makes the Power Platform in enterprise mode so secure and manageable? So what is it that I'm providing in this mode that I'm not getting from productivity? Because again, productivity is simply protecting my Office assets. And so this integrated security and management is going to be represented in a series of capabilities that we are releasing now through early July. And so if I strongly encourage you to attend Build and to go through and make sure that you target all the Power Platform sessions at Build, because there are things that we are releasing kind of trickling out between now and mid-May at Build, but the torrent will happen at Build. And so when I mentioned earlier these crawl, walk, run phase videos, a lot of those things I won't be able to release until Build, because it's essential in many cases that when you build your strategy that you're using the most current capabilities. And so all of these capabilities will be released at or shortly after Build in public preview mode. Some of them are rolling out now, and I will indicate to you which things are out now. In fact, most of the things I'm going to talk about here are already available. They will just be enhanced in the Build timeframe. Let's go through each of these things individually. So first, and this was announced in the last couple of weeks and is available now, is this concept of the Security Hub. So this is very similar to the Azure Security Advisor. Okay, so today, it's not called an advisor today because you can't affect the change inside of the hub today. You have to go someplace and affect the change. Again, what you're going to see over time is that today, this Security Hub is a view of your security posture across the organization. So for example, if you look at say the data policy, this is going to show you whether there are data policies that are perhaps too open because they're leaving you exposed in particular environments. And today, then you would click on the manage data policy and it would take you to the place where we're saying you should go to look and change this. So this is going to take you to the Power Platform Admin Center, the data policy tab, so you can look and see what's there. Over time, there will be a simply fix this button, right? So I can say, oh, I recognize that, I want to change that. So I'm going to go ahead and make that change. So again, the important thing about Security Hub is looking at managed environments, not at productivity environments. So non-default environments that don't include Dataverse. So in order to enact effective enterprise mode, what you're going to end up doing is every time you create a new environment that has premium users attached to it, it's also going to be a managed environment so that you can take advantage of all the features that we're talking about here. So what we're looking for from the Security Hub is to do more than just, so at this point, once Security Hub is fully activated, you're not going to have to go look for things in the COE starter kit that might be a problem. Because the reality is, even if you know what's in the kit, you may not know how those things put together create the problem. What we're doing here is saying this is an alert, and based on our analysis of your underlying data, and here's how we think we should correct it. And this is something, because we have a lot of enterprises on Azure who are used to seeing Security Advisor, they want a similar functionality, so we're building this functionality. You'll see a similar hub coming out in the build time frame that's specific to AI. We have a lot of folks who are like, I don't know, I want to know who's building AI bots. I want to know what data sources they're using, right? And so we're going to see something similar focused on AI because it's such a major thing for us, and we want our customers to be confident that the way AI is being deployed is meeting the requirements that they have, and so we'll help them see that posture through that AI view. The second thing is that our customers are basically saying, look, there's data being generated in Dataverse and there's data being generated in SQL Server, and in many cases that data has the same I want to see in one place that this is employee data, irrespective of where it is, and I want to see what data we consider to be general versus confidential versus highly confidential. So being able to apply labels to data types and then to see all of those data types together is a critical piece of functionality. And so this enterprise data management functionality comes from implementing the Purview and Azure Synapse integration inside of the Power Platform. And so once we do that in my Purview data catalog, I can now see not only data from SQL Server or SAP or other sources that I'm ingesting data, but I can see that Dataverse data alongside it, and I can see those things in a single place. This also gives me things like data lineage. So I want to see how this field has evolved over time, where it came from, where it used to be stored, how it's stored now, how the form would have changed, which is a kind of a critical thing in data analysis to be able to see that lineage. Purview, again, gives you that lineage information. So this integration is going to enable enterprises implementing enterprise mode on the Power Platform to integrate the data views and labeling and protection with the same standards that they're using for their other enterprise data sources. I mentioned before that the Power Platform is a service, and it's not Azure services, which means that we need some way for people using Azure services like SQL to be able to integrate with the Power Platform, which provides its own underlying SQL in the form of Dataverse. And then we also have to be able to protect Dataverse. So we're introducing two things. One is what's called VNet support. And so what VNet support lets me do is to take assets in Azure and effectively move them into the Power Platform so they appear local to the Power Platform. Or the other way to look at it is that the Power Platform appears local to Azure, which means that instead of today, where if I connect to a SQL server in Azure, I have to have a public endpoint to use the SQL connector to get to SQL Azure. This will allow me to not use a public endpoint and to fully privatize my Azure SQL infrastructure and to make it appear as if it's part of the Power Platform. And then the other thing we've allowed then is this concept of an IP firewall in Dataverse. So I can go into Dataverse and configure it so that only certain IP ranges can get into Dataverse. So in addition to conditional access policies that limit what an application can do, I can also have another layer of protection that says in order to access Dataverse, for example, you have to be in an IP range that is part of the corporate network. So it would have to VPN in first, right, before they could go use the platform. The other thing we're adding is this concept of SIEM integration. So most major enterprises have this security information event manager where they want all the events coming out of their different systems to be pulled together. And so Microsoft Sentinel is our cloud level SIEM integration tool. And so we're adding the Power Platform metrics into Microsoft Sentinel. So you can now format all of the different data sources and error logs and messaging, and you can push all that information into your enterprise SIEM and view it in a single pane of glass. Highly requested feature by enterprise customers. Now, the other critical thing to implement enterprise mode, because as you start getting more and more applications being built, as those applications move closer to the users who are creating and consuming them, it is critical that we can also move the management of those application stacks closer to those end users, right? So we've added the ability to effectively build a delegation model. So we have a new piece of functionality called enterprise groups and rules, where I can take a group of environments and say, HR, you manage these groups of environments. And whenever a new environment is created in the HR group, it's going to automatically have these data policies applied. So IT knows that even after delegating the responsibility and the authority for those groups, they are still maintaining things like data policy application, which can't be changed by the group owners, right? We've implemented a capability called default environment routing. So if I type make.powerapps.com, I can either have, and I want people to build outside of the default environment, I can either have it so that if I don't have an environment, it creates one, or if I do have an environment, it takes me there automatically, right? So now when people type make.powerapps.com, I don't put them in the default environment where productivity apps are built. I put them into an enterprise dev environment where they can build enterprise apps. We've also included the ability to do managed code promotion environment. So when I put you in that developer environment and you build your app and you're ready to test, I'll have on the left-hand rail, a pipelines link. If I click on the pipelines link, it will show me where I can deploy that application or that solution to be tested. And so now using Power Pipelines and lifecycle management, I can move that solution through dev, test, QA, IRE, prod, right? How many phases I want to move it through, I can have that follow my corporate standards for how I do application lifecycle management and code promotion. And then finally, we're gonna preview this at Build. You'll see it later this year. I mentioned earlier that we have DLP. Well, DLP is going to become connector policies, and we're going to be doing we're kind of re-architecting the connector infrastructure to give enterprises more control over how a connector can be used. So you'll see more connectors that have custom actions, more connectors with endpoint protection. So again, this is a big push from our enterprise customers saying, we want to make this more available, but we need to make sure that they're using the appropriate place. So for example, if I give you access to SAP in your dev environment, I want to lock it down so you can only use a dev instance of SAP and you can't use your credentials to go modify my production SAP instance, right? So what you're going to see in this delegation model is the ability to not only give people more capability, but to put a fence around that capability to make sure they're only using those things in the appropriate places. And so if you drill into what this is going to look like, I'm using pipelines where I first put developers into developer environments, and that's where they build. And when they're ready to promote, they're going to click on the move to test, and that's going to move to test. I can run I can run the solution checker. I can have our other out-of-bound text. I can do static analysis of the code. I can do whatever I need to do to say, yes, it's okay for this to go to test or QA. Now, in those testing QA environments, the high-level recommendation is use a sandbox for those. The reason you use a sandbox is that before I start a new pipeline cycle, I can reset that sandbox, but keep the GUID. If I keep the GUID, then the pipeline stays in place, right? And the other thing I can do in a sandbox is I can make a copy of the production environment, deploy, and make sure that I'm not interfering with any existing applications. So there's a lot of functionality that you get from building your testing QAs in sandboxes. And then finally, in production, those production environments, I can configure the production environment so that the promotion happens by IT. So the same folks who do the production deployments for other web apps or other red stacks can manage the production deployment for Power Platform applications as well. They can configure those production environments so that you're not allowed to put an unmanaged solution in production. So only managed solutions go into production. They can the promotion process can happen with the service principal, so no one ever logs into a production environment with an interactive login. You can also have the promotion to production configured so that once a successful promotion happens, the code that is the basis, the unmanaged code that's a basis of that promotion process can be pushed into ADO or GitHub, right? So when a Power Platform application gets into production, the source code is the same place that all the other source code is. And if I want to go modify that, I can ask IT to build a developer environment for me and to place that unmanaged version of the solution back into that dev environment, and I can start the cycle over again. So again, this has been kind of a high-level view of what it means to be enterprise mode. I've tried to give you some ideas, some tips about as you start thinking about your enterprise mode implementation, How do you present this implementation to the IT and to senior management in your IT organization to give them the assurance that that this is not just a SharePoint app. This is an enterprise app for the same enterprise grade level of protection and security that's wrapped around it. And in many cases, the same tools they use to manage the other pro code applications and COTS applications that store enterprise data. So if you want some additional resources, a couple of things in the lower left, I have a link and we'll share this deck with you. But if you just go search the Power Platform blog and for that title, Protect Enterprise Solutions with New Security, this will go into detail about the different enterprise capabilities that I went through in those 6 different slides about the SIM and the Security Advisor, et cetera. Some of these things are in private preview now and will be public preview or GA at build. So if you're interested in consuming them now, you can go to this link, and the links to the private previews are in this article. If you're not a subscriber, I hate to sound for $99.99 set against you knives, but however, there are 2 other places that you can go that I strongly encourage you to subscribe. The top one is my Power Platform Governance Blueprint YouTube site. And so that QR code will take you to that site where you can subscribe. And as I mentioned, the enterprise mode videos, there's one out there now that goes into detail about an overview of the enterprise mode implementation strategy. And then there will be additional ones that go through the implementation in more detail, along with some demos of the capabilities. And then if you don't already subscribe to this, I strongly encourage you to subscribe to the PowerCat video site on YouTube, in addition, of course, to the Power Hug site, or the Hug site. So with the PowerCat videos, a lot of these new technologies that I've mentioned here, if you're not familiar with them, there are videos on the PowerCat YouTube site that walk through, say, environment routing in detail, walk through what is a managed environment in detail. So you'll get a lot of that 200 and 300 level information about these capabilities from PowerCat. What you'll get on the presentations that I do are how do I take those building blocks that PowerCat discusses and implement them in an enterprise mode, basically. So it's not Microsoft on how this stuff works. It is how do you make this real for your enterprise. And so I don't think we have time because I talked too slowly and too long. But if there are specific questions we can address, happy to address any questions they have in the chat. But I'll hand it back to Randall or whoever else is coordinating.
Thank you, John. If you have a moment, we did have one question come through from Spain, which is exciting to me, at least.
Okay, I don't know Spanish, so they're going to get an English answer.
Oh, I think that's fine.
Okay.
He's got a customer that has forbidden the SAP ERP connector. He's not really sure why. They've got Azure infrastructure, a lot of Microsoft usage. Do you have any theories on why they might prohibit that and what strategy he could take to talk them out of prohibiting that? Well,
I mean, it's likely prohibited for ignorance. And I didn't say stupidity. I want to be clear, right? Here's the irony of his question. And if I had 5 pesos, I'd send it to him. Although it would cost more to send him the 5 pesos than to give it to him. But I'm at a customer this week implementing an enterprise mode strategy who a month ago said, "You will never touch my SAP implementation." And I have 5 developers in another room right now building out a bunch of custom apps using a Power Platform in enterprise mode with SAP. Now, the way we convince them of that is by pointing out 2 key things. First of all, and this is critical on any enterprise system, we don't do authorization. Enterprise architects don't get that. What they think is the SAP connector means I can touch they think it turns SAP into SQL Server. That is not what it does, okay? You can't even consume the SAP connector unless you have an SAP ID and password. And that SAP ID and password has been given a profile in SAP that tells you what data you have access to and what BAPIs or processes you can call. So IT is always in control of what data they allow on SAP. That's the first key thing to understand. The second thing to understand, and this is when I was talking about developer environments, is that they can give you the SAP connector in a developer environment configured in a way that the only thing you can connect to, even if you have production credentials, is a developer instance of SAP. And that's been the big concern, because a lot of times, like we've had cases where customers would say, open up the SQL connector. And so someone who doesn't really know what they're doing will go in and start writing a Power App. They'll take the SQL connector. They know they're running an application that uses SQL. And so they'll log in using those credentials and they'll see the SQL data. And they'll think, gosh, that's cool. I'm going to delete some rows. What did they just do? They deleted production data. Well, anyone who's had that experience at enterprise level is not going to give you a premium connector because they did not implement the platform in a way that it supported the enterprise standard of dev environments touch dev data, production environments touch production data. So as you can see from the presentation, it may be worth showing them this or showing them that giving SAP to the connector to the Power Platform does not confer any capability beyond what they allow on the back end. And if they do this properly, there is literally no difference from having someone with a C# application using the .NET provider for NetWeaver writing an SAP app than there is using Power Platform, because a .NET developer using this would not be given credentials to a production environment. They would log in with a different set of credentials. Right? So again, that's why I say this is ignorance. This is about, and again, I'm not blaming him or the customer, because at the end of the day, it's Microsoft's responsibility to tell our customers how they can use our products in a way that doesn't compromise their crown jewels. If we don't do that, I wouldn't adopt our platform, right? So that's what this initiative is about. That's why you're seeing these kind of enterprise mode presentations. That's why I would strongly encourage you to have the folks from Spain that are pushing back, try to get them in some of the build sessions on governance and enterprise mode. Right? Some of the concepts I'm covering here will be covered in much more detail and depth within build, right? So there's information out there. This presentation, the presentations that I'll be putting out in the next month or so that go through what enterprise mode is and what those protections are, that I think that if he can move IT to a position that says, if it's no more dangerous than my current standard, in fact, in many cases, it's safer than my current standard, then why would I not want to do that? Because the other thing the IT folks don't realize is they've never seen the stacks conversation. I will tell you, I've had this stacks conversation with about 200 customers in the last year. And now when I get on calls with these customers, they would say, we have a red stack, we're retiring. They don't say I have a legacy app. They say I have a red stack, right? So just getting IT to think about the fact that they have all this stuff that they are responsible for maintaining, and it will alleviate those responsibilities if they move those apps to the Power Platform or they build new on the Power Platform. That's a really long-winded answer for just having understand enterprise mode. Right.
Awesome. Thank you so much, John. It looks like he has one quick follow-up here. Would you recommend using Power Automate Desktop as an alternative route, or should he insist on that SAP connector?
If IT is afraid of the connector, they should be terrified by Power Automate Desktop.
That's what I was thinking as well.
Right? Because if I have Power Automate Desktop, I can take that data, do anything I want with it. In fact, most organizations I work with, they have end users who they bought Power Automate Desktop for, or they bought the full premium SKU, and they didn't realize that those users were building out enterprise apps on RPA. And every time they made a change to a SAP GUI or a Fiori application, those applications were breaking and they were getting help desk calls. They didn't know why. I mean, basically, they were giving away the keys to the kingdom by allowing screen scraping. So most organizations I work with in enterprise mode, what they're asking is they're using they use PAD as a prototyping tool, right? So the end user department can go through and show what they're trying to do by doing a recording of their PAD sequence, give that to IT, and IT can say, oh, here are the underlying BAPIs that are used by that. Let me give those to you, access to those, and now build this as an enterprise mode application so I can see what you're doing. Whereas I can't see that if you're running PAD. It looks like a user. I'm not saying there aren't opportunities to use RPA, but using RPA for production access to an SAP server versus using DPA that is using the connector to do it, IT is much more exposed to RPA than they are with DPA.
Awesome. Thank you so much, John. So I'll bring us to a close here. So thank you again to everybody that joined us today. Thank you to John for giving us some of your time and insight. This was extremely valuable. We'll have this up on YouTube shortly at Power Platform Hug. We'll be here every fourth Thursday of the month, with next month's session being on, I believe, the 23rd of May, and that will be an AMA. So if you have questions like what just came up, we'd love to field those and help you get started or accelerate your Power Platform journey. If you are interested in speaking, telling a story, presenting in any way, shape, or form for June or July, or really any sort of future session, we'd love to hear from you. Please reach out to us via the platform. You can find us on LinkedIn there, and we'll continue to have our recordings posted both in the platform and on YouTube. QR code in the bottom right is to join the community if you have not already, aka.ms/powerhugs, another route there. And the AMA submission questions, we've got in the QA a direct link to the form to fill out there. You can also scan that QR code if you'd like to submit your questions. Whether or not you're able to attend or not, we'll try to get to your questions and answer them and provide them to you on the recording. So thank you again to everybody who joined us today. Have a wonderful rest of your week, and we'll see you next month at our Power Hug May session.